One thing a lot of people have been surprised by is the fact that the inverter ships from the factory with a 3-hour timeout. After 3 hours, it disables itself, and unfortunately, it will not re-enable itself without completely power cycling the van. So that's something that we needed to fix.
Well, this is an area that you're definitely not supposed to get into, and Airstream did not make it easy. In order to get into this part, you have to pull the back panel here, and you also have to pull the floor panel here with a bunch of different screws and then kind of wedge it out. You can't take the back panel here off until you take the panel below here off, and getting them back in is a pain anyway. But the reward is getting to the inverter unit here. So this inverter, it comes set from the factory with a 3-hour timeout, which is kind of obnoxious because the inverter will, after 3 hours, completely time out, and then it refuses to respond to any signals after that until you completely power cycle the unit off and on again. So if you check your manual, it does say how to change that setting. The factory does not recommend changing it because obviously it could drain the battery completely. But as long as you're careful and you control it yourself from the control panel, turn it off when you're not using it, should be fine, and that way you don't have to continually power cycle your van to make the thing work.
This is the Xantrex manual for the inverter and describing the settings that you can adjust. So the setting that we want to change here is setting number 5, power save time. It is currently defaulting to 3 hours, and you can set it from 1 to 25 or off. The Firefly control unit will control many of these settings, but it does not appear to control this setting. So the way you update the setting is you just hit the OK button on the inverter, then you can cycle through the various settings. When you get to setting number 5, you press the OK button again, and then you can cycle the number of hours up to 25, and when you get past 25, it goes to off. So that's how I set the delay time to off.
The inverter went back to timing out after 3 hours. So I decided to pull the panel open and see what was going on, and I'm actually kind of glad I did. First thing I noticed is, yeah, the inverter had been reset to its setting to time out after 3 hours from off. So I suspect the Firefly unit is just overriding whatever's put in the control panel here and resetting it every time it's turned on. And what that means is, without a firmware update to the Firefly unit where it explicitly allows me to set that setting, there's really no way to change that. And that's unfortunate. But I was kind of glad I pulled the panel apart because I noticed something that I didn't before. This backboard here that all the units are mounted into, it's basically hanging by one screw. It looks like it was supposed to be screwed into wall mounts here, but wasn't. And so I need to take care of that and secure it. But also finding all kinds of random things, just garbage and a utility knife with an Airstream symbol on it. Interesting. Left in the cabinet here. So definitely recommend taking your panels off and seeing what's inside there. You never know what you might find. Another thing to be aware of is that even with the battery disconnect off, the inverter actually stays on all the time and continues to draw a significant amount of power, which will run down your batteries. I'm not sure why they designed it that way, but that's the way it is. You can see on the inverter here, there actually is a power switch, and you can power it off. But there is no easy way to get to it. You have to completely pull this panel inside the cubby to get down to the inverter. Now looking at it, I'm wondering if we can maybe get an easier access. You can see the inverter does have a vent hole here because it runs the blower on the inverter all the time. I'm wondering if we can rearrange this vent panel so that we can open it up, reach in, and power off the inverter. That way it won't be draining the battery unnecessarily when the van is entirely off. Wow. I was going to pull off this little grate panel to see if I could use that as an access. And looking at it, it's just a little plastic grate that they've screwed on, but they put an insane amount of screws into this thing. It is not going to be fun to pull off. Plus the inverter, which is screwed down to the floor, is right up close to it, so there's really no room to even get a screwdriver in there. Well, I finally managed to get this screen off. This thing was kind of insane. They put a total of 27 screws holding this in place. There was literally one every single inch. And it was so tightly screwed in, there's no space to work in there. I got a few of the screws out, and finally I'm like, I'm just going to rip it. So I ripped it off. My plan is I'm going to build a new little screen door right here that I can put a hinge on, so it'll hinge open. And through here, you can reach in and push the power switch on the inverter to power it on and off. You can see the inverter pretty clearly there, and it's pretty easy to just reach in and hit the power switch through this opening. Here's what I'm planning for the access panel to be able to get to the inverter power switch. What I did is I just found some 1/2-inch round sitting around the garage, and I'm going to build a little frame, just a little mitered frame up the edge, across, over, down, and then just put the screen on the inside of that frame. Use a couple hinges across the top to swing it up, and then have a magnet across the bottom. It'll just stick to a screw to hold it closed. And that should be a nice, quick, and easy access panel. I cut the 1/2-inch round, simple 45-degree miters. We'll tack these together and glue them to make a nice little frame. But first I'm just going to tape it together and check the fit to make sure it works well. And there's where it's going to fit. It'll be up off the side a little bit. I'll put the hinges across the top. It looks like it fits about right there. Looks like the swing just barely clears the trim panel on the other side. So all that looks perfect. What I'm going to do is just cut down this plastic panel so that it fits right on the inside here. Then I'll have the magnet mounted at the bottom, which will just tack onto a screw that I can screw in. And I'll put the hinges across the top, and that should do it. I chose to do a quick spray paint with black to match the rest of the trim in the back. Everything's all glued together, so now I'll just screw this on and then attach the hinges and the magnet, and then we should be ready to mount it in the back. There is the screen attached. I think that looks really nice. Very much matching the vibe of the rest of the back of the van. Now for the hinges. There we have the hinges attached, and I've glued a little bar magnet on the bottom. Now ready to mount it in the van. This is what I've come up with. So you can see I've painted it all black, which I think matches the styling very nicely. I've got the screen attached to the back. Got a couple of hinges, a little magnet on the bottom, and I'll just put some screws into the side right here, and the magnet will snap to those and hold itself closed. Should be able to swing up this and give me easy access to the inverter to power it off. Now we have it screwed in. It's actually nice and stiff, which I really like because it'll hold itself up. But I'm still going to go ahead and put a couple screws in here for the magnet to snap to keep it closed solidly. Really like the way that looks. Airstream should have done it this way. Everything's buttoned back up again. You can see the nice cargo nets there. They kind of match the styling, look good and are useful. Everything in this cabinet is all put back together. We still have access to the inverter when we need it without pulling everything apart, which is nice. One minor repair here worth mentioning. This rear door rubber trim here that seals the rear door did not fit particularly well. Airstream had tried to glue it, but it was just hanging loose, which is not great because the door, as it opens and closes, would eventually wrinkle that up and cause gaps. So a little bit of adhesive and some clear caulk sealant to secure it in place, and that's much better. So I recommend checking your door to see if it's the same as mine and fixing that before it becomes a problem.